Hi everyone, welcome back to our RBT training. So today we're going to start discussing another form of taking data. In previous sessions we were talking primarily about task analysis and shaping and taking data as we were engaging in those teaching procedures. So today we're going to continue with that. We're going to talk a little bit more about the different types of data collection options that are out there, and then we're going to start really focusing on DTT, or discrete trial training, for this piece, okay? So let's just review a few different types of data taking procedures. Things that we've already talked about. We talked about our task analysis, right? So in the taking a very complex task, we can break it down into smaller steps, teach them one after the other until that learner is proficient at each of those individual steps, and then we can put them together in a complete chain, okay, to teach a very long and lengthy complex behavior. Or we can take shaping and take a behavior that's already in their repertoire and continually shape it by reinforcing successive approximations of that behavior until we reach our final end goal, right? So those were some behavioral teaching procedures that we've already gone over. Another one that we discussed just briefly was taking ABC data, right? So analyzing the antecedent, the behavior, and then the consequence in order to better understand behavior in terms of why it's occurring and what things likely elicit or evoke a behavior, okay? And we'll get into ABC data collection in further detail later in our training when we discuss the process of conducting an FBA further. All right, so another type of data that we're going to be using often when we use DTT is what we call trial by trial data. There's a few different examples of trial by trial data. And so I'm going to show you some different options here. These will also be located within your folders on your online training, so be sure to look at those sections so that you can have these more up close and in front of you. But this is what we call a random rotation data sheet. And this specific data sheet, although this is frequency because we're analyzing how often an individual is able to accurately respond to our direction or a prompt, we're purposefully rotating through different stimuli. And so that's why this data collection sheet looks a little bit more complex than perhaps something that you've seen and encountered if you've worked in school or you're doing DTT, which is something more like this, where you have the program here with the prompt, and then you've got all 10 trials in a row, right? This is more of like what you would call your mass trial data sheet. Again, we're going to go through this more detail shortly, but I want to just continue going through the other options for taking data. So this is another example that you might come across. Also, this is another form of frequency data sheet. Here we're analyzing how often or how frequently our learner is able to mand. Okay, so remember, manding is making a request. This is a mand training program, so we're teaching language here, and we're teaching this child the ability to use language in order to gain access to items. So contingent on our trial, we're saying, okay, you know, did he ask for it independently? Did he need a prompt, or did he not do it at all? And so because each time we're marking a yes or a no, then this technically is frequency. Okay, Now, aside from frequency, we also have another type of data, which is duration, okay? Or sometimes time can also be interval data. And we'll get into that in more depth later on in our training because there's a few different types of interval data that you can take. But here we're measuring, how often and how long does a behavior occur. And so this is what we call a 5-minute scatter plot data sheet. So every 5 minutes, our therapist or BT is going through and they're checking off whether or not a behavior did or did not occur during that time interval. Okay, and this offers a variety of great information as well. And we'll talk more about that again later in our sessions. And another type of data is probe data. Probe data is kind of similar to frequency in that you are measuring if an individual does or does not have that skill or ability, but instead of taking mass data collection on it, multiple times, so instead of whether you use it in inter-trial, you intersperse your trials, or you're using random rotation, instead of asking the learner multiple times and then kind of giving that percent, so like 80% of the time, or they got it 60% of the time. This is just one quick snapshot. So that first time that you approach that individual and you assess that skill, how did they perform? Okay, this can be very useful when you are crunched for time, okay, and you don't have the ability to sit there and do 10 trials worth of one skill. Or maybe you have a learner who has already mastered a program and you want to just ensure that they're maintaining that program over time. So maybe one time per week you make sure that you ask them or you check in on that skill and you measure how well did they do. Because real mastery comes from if the first time you ask them to do something and they got it without having to be retaught or reprompted, then that really shows that they've mastered that skill, right? So that's why probe data can be beneficial. It's time saving, it gives you a quick snapshot, but it does take away from you really knowing if maybe that individual was just having a bad day or a bad few minutes, okay? Because it's not going to give you an overall percentage or guide to how well they know that information, okay? And we're going to go into taking probe data a little bit more later on as well. Last but not least, sometimes you'll see data that's all combined and in a sheet like this. So you're going to have a variety of data all within one page or in a packet. This can be useful if your BCBA or the teacher who's managing your case expects you to run a different programs that require you to take different kinds of data, okay? So maybe you have to take some frequency data. And for example, like gaining access to attention. How many times do they actually tap to gain your attention? How many times do they say the person's name? How many times do they make contact, right? So that's frequency data. Then you could also measure, according to time. So in each half-hour interval, how many times are they requesting something? Or how much time are they able to stay on task? Are they staying on task for that entire 15-minute interval time or no, okay? So you might have to take duration and interval data all in one session, as well as possibly taking some ABC data, okay? So ABC data could be on the next page as well. So there are a variety of ways that you're going to encounter data sheets and programming, and most frequently, however, you're going to be coming across things that are in DTT or frequency-based data. So I'm going to stop here for a moment, and then we're going to get into exactly why taking data is so important and why we continually need to assess, no matter what kind of data we're taking. So I'm going to show you a graph. Okay, you're all familiar with graphs at this point because you've been doing your own SAFMED timings and self-assessing yourself on those timings and inputting it into some graphs. So some basic things, obviously we have the title of the graph, or here our title is going to be the program name, matching picture to objects, okay? And then down here we've got our axis that displays percent correct, and then down here we've got our time axis or date, the days that these trials were run on, okay? And down here I have a key. This key is pretty large, but this key is showing us information regarding our set list, which we'll get into all of these aspects of DTT in a few minutes. But what I really want to point out to you, it is so important and crucial that we take data, and that when we take data, we're continually assessing it, and we're monitoring for progress, maintenance, and generalization. So here, hello? Hello?